Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Hospitality Talks. And I'm really excited to have Katy Leech, who is Head of Channel Development for Food Service and Licensed for Britvic Soft Drinks with me. Katy, I doubt there's many people in the world that don't know who Britvic are, but maybe you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself and your role there.
Yeah, sure. So hi everybody, I'm Katy, and as Katy has mentioned, I head up the channel development team for food service and license. So what that means is that we do everything from category management through to shopper activation for all operators within the food service and licensed environments.
Fantastic. So quite a big task you've got there. Let's just talk briefly. I want to sort of set the scene a little bit as to the sort of the changes in consumption that have happened since the pandemic. I mean, obviously the on-trade disaster aside, what changes, if any, have you seen in the sort of soft drinks and the low-no spaces?
Yeah, so I think the pandemic kind of threw health and wellness at the forefront of consumers' minds. So health and wellness and being aware of kind of what people are consuming from a food and drinks perspective was very much kind of there in people's minds, but the pandemic kind of really put it into the spotlight. And what we saw kind of throughout the pandemic were kind of almost two camps. We saw one group of consumers who really were sort of turning more to alcohol, and then we saw a huge proportion of consumers that were actually sort of thinking about their health and well-being a bit more, and wanted to have alcohol-free alternatives. And when the trade reopened, actually we saw the kind of the biggest thing that consumers were looking for were those experiences that couldn't be replicated at home, and that's where this kind of low and no has a really important role to play in providing guests with those really kind of great experiences that they can't necessarily get at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw obviously a massive increase in sales of low and no, but also in recognition of it as a category, both from operators, retailers and consumers. And I think you're absolutely right. The idea that we were all sort of stuck in our homes, so we wanted to try something else, and we were looking out for our health. And then obviously there were some others that were maybe drowning their sorrows a bit. But what are the current trends that we're seeing in the sort of soft drink and low and no arena?
So one thing that has really kind of accelerated in the last sort of 12 months is the expansion of low and no. So if you think about low and no in its traditional form, it typically used to be kind of low and no ABV beers, and it was a fairly sort of limited alternative to alcohol. Whereas now what we're seeing is really great expansion into different alternatives. So you've got zero proof alcohol. You've got all of these lovely distilled kind of spirit alternatives. You've also got things like mocktails and house sodas, which are kind of spanning between soft drinks and the low and no category. And I think that's probably the most exciting space actually, because it's one that operators can really kind of, do something different with to make their kind of venue stand out from the crowd. You've got really great tastes and really great flavors and different garnishes, and I think that's kind of one of the most exciting spaces that we're seeing, definitely spanning between those traditional soft drinks into low and no alternatives. One really interesting thing as well actually is we're also seeing consumption of mixers drunk on their own as an alternative. So rather than a typical mixer and spirit, we're seeing more and more people now drinking kind of the flavoured tonics, and having those kind of solus mixer occasions as an alcohol alternative. So it's really interesting to kind of see the expansion of low and no into lots of different categories, and it's one that's really exciting.
Yeah, because when was it? Probably about 8 years ago, we did some research with a company that will not be named, who was trying to launch a low and no product. I remember doing all the testing for it, and just the liquid quality was just terrible, and and the branding was awful, and they didn't really know whether it sat in the soft drink space or the low and no. And we've come so far from that now. And I'm very lucky that in this job I get sent quite a lot of the sort of low and no.
Yeah.
I mean, my bar is about half alcohol and half low and no. And the brandings are beautiful, the bottles are beautiful, and I just think, especially when you look at the spirits, I think that we've come so far in that arena. So what effect do you think low and no has had on the soft drinks category as a whole, other than that idea of drinking the flavored tonics without the alcohol in?
I think it's really helped to raise the profile of soft drinks, and I think it's helped to kind of change the perception of the category. And it's not something that's just for designated drivers. It's not a category that's just for children. It's actually a really nice category that it spans all different day parts. You know, it's probably one of the only categories that can actually be consumed from, you know, breakfast, lunch and dinner, and I think it's really just helped to raise that profile of the soft drinks category. And you know, you talked about taste and having those great tastes. Well, taste is the number one reason that people choose any drink, and actually you're completely right. You know, if it doesn't taste good, it's not going to sell. So having those really great tasting drinks from all the way through from traditional soft drinks to low and no alternatives will really just help to raise guest experiences and keep them, you know, keep them buying into that category and keep them coming back time and time again.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know from some research that we actually did just shortly before the pandemic, as everything is now pre or post pandemic. But when we did this research, and I think there's something like 28% of people who don't drink an alcoholic drink in a pub or a restaurant just have tap water. You know, and the missed opportunity that is, you know, when there's something like 300 million on-trade visits nowadays do not involve alcohol. So you know, the trade as a whole, it's such a missed opportunity if we're not participating in low and no. And it's interesting what you say about, you know, low and no and soft drinks interacting well, because I think the initial idea was, oh, well, that's a real threat to soft drinks. You know, what are they going to be doing about it? But in your mind, you think that they coexist well?
Yeah, completely. And I think low and no, it positions soft drinks and alcohol as kind of like one big drinks category. So low and no enables soft drinks to kind of, you know, move into that space, and it also helps the kind of the alcohol categories kind of move into a new space as well. And I think what we're seeing more and more is that low and no alternatives are, you know, really strong additions to the bar actually. So rather than just having, you know, a juice drink and a cola available and some low and no beer, actually you've now got this really exciting kind of space in the middle. And I think, you know, your point around tap water, it's so important, because people that don't want to have you know, alcohol and they haven't got a soft drink that's necessarily right for them, this low and no opportunity really helps to kind of, you know, get them to buying into the category. You know, we know tap water or not even having a drink and lime and soda, you know, they're the biggest opportunities for the trade to really, you know, get into this space, and also for consumers to have a great time, right? You don't want to be out having, you know, tap water time and time again. And the great thing with low and no is, you know, there's all these exciting new flavors and different twists you can have on things, and you know, if it's served in a beautiful glass, you know, you can have a really great experience without alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is about that, isn't it? It's about the theatre of it. You know, you don't, you know, you get wine in a beautiful glass, you get beer in the right glass, you get cocktails with all the, you know, and then someone else is sat at the table with a glass of tap water, and it's, you know, it's really unfair, hasn't it, for the people that aren't drinking for whatever reason. So I think it's really good to see licensees and people in the trade making a thing of the low and no space, and actually making sure that the consumer has as good an experience whether they're drinking alcohol or not. So, you know, I think that's great.
Yeah, completely. And I think there's lots of operators out there that do a really great job. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, thinking like Drake and Morgan, or, you know, the Alchemist groups and G1 up in Scotland, you know, they have these really great, gorgeous glasses with crushed ice and different flavored syrups, you know, mixed with, you know, lemonades or sodas, and it just, they look beautiful, and they taste amazing. And I think that's where these guys do really well, and you know, others can take inspiration from.
Very Instagrammable, as the kids would say.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Katy, just to finish up then, what do you think's next for both the soft drinks and the low and no categories?
Yeah, so the prediction is that, you know, both categories will continue to grow. I think since the trade has reopened, we've seen soft drinks really kind of bouncing back in kind of those environments, and I think low and no will just continue to grow. You know, we know more and more people are willing to try these different categories. You know, Dry January last year was the biggest ever Dry January ever, and I think, you know, the fact that operators are, you know, making these drinks more appealing, you know, they're getting more and more visibility on on menus as well. So I think, you know, they'll continue to grow, but I think we need to be conscious that they are, as I've said, kind of additions to the bar. You know, they are opportunities for people that want to trade into these categories rather than trading down. You know, we're not saying don't drink alcohol, don't stock alcohol. You know, people can still have a nice glass of wine and a low and no on the same occasion. So I think, you know, we'll continue to see this grow over the next kind of few years, and I think it's here to stay.
I absolutely agree. And your comment then just about the you know, having a nice glass of wine and then a low and no. We did some research recently with Gen Z. I don't know if you've seen it, but I'll send it to you after this conversation. But they actually use low and no in exactly that way to moderate their alcohol intake.
Yeah.
And they will go and have a beer, but then have a low no
Yeah.
beer. And actually, you know, that in itself is becoming a new occasion and a new way to interact with consumers. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that both categories are going to be growing quite a lot over the next few years. Katy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really, really interesting to hear your views on everything, and I hope to see you soon in real life to share
Yeah.
a beer.
Definitely. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for your time.